Christianity was born into a Greco-Roman world where the imperial cult reigned supreme. The illustrious Caesar Augustus was declared Divi Filius, the son of a god, as well as savior of the world. An ancient monument even declares the Euangelion, that is, gospel or good news, of his birth as a god, marking the beginning of a new and triumphant era. Following his death in 14 CE, the Romans regarded Augustus as having joined the company of the gods. Per Suetonius, there was a man of Praetorian rank who swore an oath that he had seen the form of the cremated emperor ascending to heaven. Early Christians adopted the rhetoric of the imperial cult to hail Christ as their savior, pitting him against Caesar and declaring his superiority. Just as various Caesars were deified in the image of Rome's legendary founder Romulus, Christianity appears also to have partaken of the Romulan tradition. Like Romulus, Christ is taken up in a cloud, deified and immortalized, accompanied by prodigies and darkness over the land, later appearing to witnesses to issue a great commission. The Gospel of Matthew seems to emulate the death of Julius Caesar, with earthquakes, darkened skies, and the silent dead rising from their tombs, just as we find in Ovid's earlier account. The pervasive mystery religions were another popular religious expression against which Christianity was competing in the Greco-Roman world. These clandestine cults centered on deities who triumphed over death in some way, imparting salvation and rebirth upon their devotees. In Paul's letter to the Romans, he condemns those who, though wise, became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. Paul is likely engaging a polemic against Egyptian religion in Rome, with their divinization and reverence of hawks, felines, and crocodiles, something which even some Romans found odd. But, to quote John Day once again, polemic can sometimes involve taking up one's enemy's imagery and reutilizing it for one's own purposes. And Paul appears to be doing just that later in Romans 6. There, he describes baptism as a ritual act in which one mystically participates in the death and resurrection of Christ, becoming like him in his death and rising as he did to new life, a spiritual rebirth that would culminate in a literal resurrection to come. Members of the Egyptian mysteries in Rome were likely undergoing the same kind of ritual, baptized into the death of Osiris, who had drowned in the Nile waters and reborn, Rheinatus, by identification with his resurrection. As New Testament scholar Brooke W.R. Pearson explains, Paul is tapping into the love-hate relationship that many Romans had with Egyptian religion. On the one hand, Romans found various Egyptian practices primitive and strange, as Paul exploits in chapter 1 with his denigration of animal worship. But on the other hand, many in the Greco-Roman world were seized by fascination with Egypt's mystique and grandeur, with cult centers devoted to the worship of Isis and Osiris spread throughout the empire. Paul thus condemns Egyptian religion in chapter 1 of Romans, but reutilizes a popular aspect of it in chapter 6, another prime example of competitive assimilation.